Ned Stark stood in the godswood of the Red Keep, his breath turning to faint white clouds in the chill of early morning. The weirwood heart tree, though far from the icy forests of the north, looked upon him with silent reproach. It had no face carved into its bark here in King's Landing, and yet he felt watched. He had not slept well since discovering the dark secret of the royal lineage, since confirming the rumors and suspicions that had weighed upon him like a millstone. The knowledge that Cersei Lannister's children were not Robert's had gnawed at him. Even so, he had attempted to do the honorable thing by confronting her and offering a chance to flee. Now, all the swirling politics and the danger had coalesced into a single imperative: find a way to protect himself and those under his care, and to restore order in a kingdom quickly plunging into chaos. The threat of the Lannisters loomed ever larger. Joffrey sat the Iron Throne in name, but Ned knew that, by law and blood, Stannis Baratheon should be king. Yet, another Baratheon brother, Renly, had approached Ned in the hush of midnight with a proposition. Ned could not forget the conversation. In the gloom of his bedchamber, as a single candle flickered, Renly had appeared. "Lord Stark," he had said in hushed, urgent tones, "I know what you discovered, and I know what it means for the throne. My brother Stannis believes he should be king. He stands upon ceremony and the letter of the law, but he has never warmed the hearts of men. I ask you, for the good of the realm, to consider a different path, a different king." Me. Ned had balked at Renly's words at first, seeing only a younger brother grasping for a crown that was not rightfully his. Honor dictated that Stannis should inherit, especially given the illegitimacy of Cersei's children. But as Renly spoke, with an earnestness that seemed surprising in such a moment, something stirred in Ned. If the realm devolved into civil war, if the Lannisters seized power through Joffrey, if Stannis descended from Dragonstone with a punitive sword in hand, countless lives might be lost. Renly's plan was bold: unite the might of the Stormlands with the power of the North, combine them with the Vale. If Ned could gain the support of his wife's sister Lysa Arryn, and perhaps even secure the allegiance of House Tyrell, Renly's in-laws, should Renly choose to marry Margaery Tyrell. It was not just idle ambition. There was a notion of real unity, a single force that would dwarf what Tywin Lannister could muster. Ned had stood in silence that night, his jaw set, his heart torn. Honor told him that Stannis was the rightful heir, but reason whispered that Stannis would rule with a cold, unyielding grip. And more practically, if Ned failed to secure enough power to defend himself, Cersei would have him killed soon enough. The realm was already a tinderbox. Then, Renly had made his final plea. "Lord Eddard, I beg you. Join me. Let us spare the realm a war. We can strike swiftly. We can protect the children, your daughters, Sansa and Arya. We can rid the court of the Lannisters whole. The Stormlands, the Reach, and the North can shape a lasting peace. Join me, and I will name you protector of the realm in truth, not just in words." Ned had said nothing in that moment, torn between the laws of succession, which he revered, and the reality of the kingdom's precarious state. But within a day, everything changed. Littlefinger's plotting began to seep in. Ned realized that the Master of Coin had his own designs for the throne. The day Robert died, Cersei attempted to undermine Ned's power at once. She snatched the letter naming Ned regent for Joffrey and shredded it with dismissive contempt. Guards loyal to the Lannisters clashed with Stark men. But Ned had allies still. The City Watch, which he believed would stand behind him if he acted swiftly, but even that seemed uncertain in the face of Littlefinger's gold. To add to the complexity, Varys appeared in Ned's chambers with half-hidden hints, emphasizing the precarious state of Ned's life and the risk to Sansa and Arya. Late that evening, Renly came again, an urgent, hushed visitor in Ned's private rooms. "Lord Stark," Renly said, "I offer you a chance to seize Cersei before she moves against us. I have 100 men ready. We can round up the queen and her children." Once, in another timeline, Ned would have refused, resolute in his sense of honor, wanting no bloodshed. He would have attempted to warn Cersei, and thereby condemned himself. But this time, a different thought had taken root in his mind. The prospect of uniting the Baratheon brother who truly wanted peace and stability, a man who might bend where Stannis would only break, loomed large. He feared war, but he feared more what would happen if he tried to walk the honorable path alone in a den of lions. And so Ned swallowed his reservations, recalled the memory of Robert's laughter, recalled the promise he once made to Lyanna, to protect. He thought of his daughters, stranded in the pit of serpents, and weighed the fate of the entire realm. That very night, he agreed to Renly Baratheon's plan. The next morning, in the God's Wood, while the black water of the pond reflected the red leaves above, Ned made his decision final. He and Renly sealed a pact in hushed voices. Ned's face was grave, and Renly's eyes glinted with ambition tempered by a certain generosity. In that moment, a union was born. That evening, Ned moved swiftly. The city watch was not wholly bought by Littlefinger yet. Janos Slynt could be swayed by the promise of gold and power, but the presence of Renly's men complicated things. More important, Sir Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, had grown uneasy with the events following Robert's death. Sir Barristan's sense of honor was as unwavering as Ned's. Renly, who had always been courteous and appreciative of Barristan's status, managed to bring him into confidence. Within hours, several quiet arrests took place. Littlefinger was cornered on his way to meet Cersei. Renly's men, along with a contingent of the city watch that still owed loyalty to the realm rather than Lannister gold, swiftly disarmed and confined him to a tower cell. The next step was to isolate the Queen and Joffrey, peaceably if possible. Ned had insisted on no harm to them. It was not Joffrey's fault that his mother and uncle had been so entwined in treachery. But the moment of confrontation arrived before the Iron Throne at dawn, with the great doors of the throne room thrown open to the gold-tinged sky. Guards loyal to House Stark and House Baratheon poured in, forming a ring. Joffrey was roused from his bed, Cersei from hers. The new king, hastily thrown into clothes more befitting a prince than a morning sun, looked upon the men with confusion, quickly turning to rage. Cersei's green eyes flashed, but she found herself surrounded. The power wrested from her in an instant. Sir Barristan approached the throne. In a calm, steady voice, he declared, "By the late King Robert's own decree, Lord Eddard Stark is regent until the true heir can be ascertained." Cersei tried to speak, but Barristan silenced her with a look that radiated a sadness and disappointment more than anger. "Your Grace," he said to Joffrey, "I am sorry, but we must relinquish the throne until this matter is resolved." The boy king spat at them. He called for the Hound, called for the Kingsguard, but more of the guards were swayed by Barristan's presence. The Hound stood by, uncertain, while Lannister soldiers were forced to lay down arms under overwhelming numbers. In that moment, Renly stepped forward. "We will not harm you, Joffrey, nor you, my lady sister-in-law. But while the question of your parentage is settled, you must both remain guests in the Red Keep. I regret the discomfort, but the realm's stability is paramount." Cersei demanded to speak, but even she saw the futility. Tyrion Lannister was not in King's Landing yet. Tywin was far away in the west, and Jaime was across the city in the Kingsguard barracks. The trap had closed around her. Renly then drew in a breath, turned to the watchers in the hall, nobles, functionaries, and guards. "Lords and ladies," he declared, "I have come to King's Landing to secure peace. Lord Eddard Stark stands at my side, sworn to the well-being of the realm. King Robert is dead. The boy on the throne is said to be Robert's son, but we have reason to believe otherwise. We will produce the evidence in due time. For the sake of peace, for the sake of the realm, and in memory of my late brother, I, Renly Baratheon of the Stormlands, do declare my intent to take the crown, and to rule with justice, mercy, and honor. Lord Stark has pledged himself to me, to protect the realm, to do what must be done, and to ensure that we avoid a needless war." Nay. Amid the stunned silence, Ned stepped forward, his voice low but firm as it carried across the chamber. "I pledge my sword and the might of the North to Lord Renly Baratheon," he said. "Let any who gainsay this speak now. We do not intend to shed blood unnecessarily. Our only ambition is to see a rightful king upon the Iron Throne. If Stannis Baratheon should challenge, then we will meet that challenge honorably. But for now, let the city be calm, and let there be no treachery among us. Now." The words fell upon those gathered like a final stroke of fate. Some frowned, uncertain how to respond. The Lannisters present were a minority, outnumbered and disarmed. Varys watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Littlefinger was not in the room, having been placed under guard elsewhere. So it began, the forging of an alliance that would shape the War of the Five Kings before it fully ignited. Renly lost no time. In the week that followed, he moved to secure the loyalty of key houses. He sent riders to Highgarden, to House Tyrell, entreating them to join him with promises of a marriage alliance. Margaery Tyrell's name drifted in the margins of every letter. He welcomed the small retinue of Stormlords that had accompanied him, men like Bryce Caron, Mathis Rowan, the Tarths, and Estermonts. They assembled in the courtyard of the Red Keep, forging alliances with the northern men Ned had brought south. Meanwhile, Ned Stark, sober and unwilling to revel in any triumph, quietly consolidated control of the city. Janos Slynt was relieved of command, and replaced with a more neutral commander, who owed allegiance less to gold and more to the stability of the capital. Sir Aerys Oakhart took charge, with Barristan's blessing. Men loyal to Cersei were pressed into disbanding. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, found himself in a precarious position. A confrontation with him was inevitable, for Jaime would not submit to any arrest. However, with Barristan Selmy's moral authority weighing heavily in the Kingsguard, Jaime chose a cunning retreat. Late one night he disappeared with a handful of men, rumored to be heading west to Casterly Rock to raise Lannister forces. Ned's first reaction upon hearing Jaime had vanished was to strengthen the city's guard at every gate, but it was too late. Jaime was gone, and with him, the threat of a Lannister counterstrike from the west became immediate. Ned expected Tywin Lannister to march. He turned to Renly. "We must prepare," Ned said. "Tywin will not leave his grandchildren or the rumor of his grandchildren in captivity, and we must decide what to do with the Queen and her son." Renly paused, deep in thought. He shared a corridor in the Red Keep with Ned, the air thick with tension. Cersei and Joffrey were effectively prisoners, though treated well. "We keep them as hostages," Renly finally said. "They have value, immense value. If Tywin Lannister marches against us, we can threaten his family's well-being. It's not a pleasant business, but it may stave off outright war." Ned did not like it, but he understood. "There is also my family to consider," he reminded Renly, voice tight. "My daughters. I'd send them home, but it's not safe to do so yet, not while Lannister riders might be on the roads." "We will protect them here," Renly assured him. "They will remain in the Red Keep, guarded by our men. I vow they will not be used as pawns. You have my word." It was a pledge Renly intended to keep. Slowly, Ned began to trust him. Word arrived swiftly that Robb Stark had called the Banners in the north. The young wolf had heard rumors of his father's dire situation. First that Ned was threatened by the Lannisters, then that Ned seemed to be forging a grand alliance. Uncertain what was truly happening, Robb had marched south with an army of fierce northern bannermen, driven by a simple goal: to protect his father and sisters. Catelyn Stark in the Riverlands was negotiating with her father, Hoster Tully, for House Tully's support. When ravens arrived clarifying that Ned and Renly were allied, that Ned was safe and Cersei captive, there was astonishment across the land. In some corners, men whispered that Renly usurped Stannis' rightful claim, but others, especially among the Stormlords, and those in the Reach, argued that Renly was the better choice. The Vale remained aloof, but if Lysa Arryn could be swayed, that would bring another powerful region into the alliance. Tywin Lannister, for his part, was not idle. With Jaime returned to him, the Lannister armies began to gather in the western hills. Rumors also spread that Tyrion the Imp was traveling toward the capital, uncertain of what he might find upon arrival. In the small council chamber, Ned and Renly began their planning. Barristan Selmy was often present, standing tall beside them. Varys would slither in with rumors and half-truths. Sometimes the cunning master of whisperers offered sly counsel. "My lords, the people whisper that King Renly's claim is built on shifting sand. Will you address this matter publicly?" Renly, with a small smile, would say, "I shall do so once the time is right. For now, let them whisper. Better that than cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. We must keep the peace in the city." Nay. Ned worried that the standoff could not last. Tywin's forces would inevitably approach the city's gates, or else strike at the Riverlands to lure out the Stark and Tully forces. Stannis, too, was an unknown variable, brooding on Dragonstone. Word was that he had begun forging alliances with lords in the narrow sea region seeking ships. But first, a new twist. The Tyrells answered Renly's call. Mace Tyrell, eager for glory and anxious to see his daughter a queen, responded that if Renly Baratheon would pledge to wed Margaery Tyrell, the might of the Reach would stand behind him. Within weeks, a grand entourage from Highgarden arrived in King's Landing, wagons loaded with provisions and gold, footmen in green and gold livery, knights by the dozen. Renly hosted a great feast in the Red Keep, and though the tension was palpable, many breathed more easily to see that so many knights marched behind the new king. Even as he was not yet officially crowned, plans for the coronation were still tentative. Renly carried himself with the easy charm that had once lit up the halls of Storm's End. In the midst of this, Sansa Stark found herself in a strange new world. Once betrothed to Joffrey, she had been told by her father that this arrangement was void. She was no longer to be a pawn of the Lannisters. Instead, Ned explained gently, she would remain by his side until they could secure her future. Sansa tried to appear grateful, though her heart mourned the lost chance at being a queen, the illusions she had clung to. But Joffrey's behavior toward her had grown cruel before everything changed. Perhaps it was for the best. Arya, on the other hand, thrived under the new circumstances. She stole away to watch the Tyrell men-at-arms practice, occasionally practicing her own water-dancing moves, though not always in secret. She found a few Stormland knights who humored her with friendly sparring and gave her pointers. Another shock arrived soon after. Tyrion Lannister slipped into the city through the Mud Gate one rainy evening. He was immediately seized by guards loyal to Ned and Renly. Instead of throwing him in a cell, Ned, remembering Tyrion's courtesy in the past, ordered him treated as a hostage but given guest quarters under heavy watch. Ned, curious, went to speak with him. Tyrion was pragmatic as ever. "Lord Stark," he said, hands folded behind his back as he gazed out a window at the city, "I hear you've allied with Lord Renly, and that my dear sister is at your mercy. Does that mean you plan to keep her locked away forever?" Ned's face was stony. "You know what your sister has done. The realm is safer with her under lock and key. It's not in my nature to harm women, or I would have executed her. Be thankful that we are not so inclined." Tyrion turned, his mismatched eyes gleaming. "I see. Well, I suppose I should thank you for your restraint. And Joffrey? How is the little king faring under house arrest?" "He is well enough. There has been no harm to him." "Good. My father will not let this stand." "I expect not," Ned said. He studied the dwarf. "Will Tywin Lannister negotiate?" "Unlikely. My father is not one for bending the knee or paying ransoms he doesn't have to. If he perceives weakness, he will seize it. If you want a diplomatic solution, I suggest appealing to his sense of advantage. Failing that, you have a war." Ned's jaw tightened. "And what of you? Where do you stand in all this?" "Truly?" Tyrion shrugged with a weary smirk. "I'd prefer not to see the realm drenched in blood. But my loyalty is, by blood, to House Lannister. It's also to my own skin, and to reason. I'm not certain the Lannisters stand much of a chance now that you have the Tyrells and the Stormlands, with the North looming behind you. But my father has a knack for turning the tide. You've seen how cunning he can be. So if you're looking for an olive branch, I might suggest you allow me to speak with him as an envoy, or at least let me write to him. He might take me more seriously than other messengers." "No." Ned considered it. "I will discuss it with Renly." So it was that Tyrion Lannister, though a prisoner, became a potential link to Tywin. Renly was intrigued by the possibility. "If we can avert war by negotiations, it's worth attempting," the new king told Ned in a private meeting. "But I doubt Tywin Lannister will yield his daughter and grandchildren without a fight." Ned agreed. "Still, we might at least try. If we can secure the realm, keep the peace, and let the truth come out, then we can decide how to handle the question of Joffrey's heritage." They wrote to Tywin Lannister, proposing a meeting under a flag of truce. The demands were steep. The Lannisters were to recognize Renly as king, relinquish any claim that Joffrey might have to the throne, and accept that Cersei and Joffrey would remain in honorable custody unless a suitable settlement could be reached. In exchange, the Lannisters would retain control of the Westerlands and all the privileges they had previously enjoyed, minus any punitive measures. Tyrion, acting as envoy, added his own flourish to the letter, trying to soften the blow. The raven flew west. Time passed in uneasy waiting. In the interim, Ned's forces grew. Robb Stark arrived at the twins, forging a quick agreement with Walder Frey for crossing, though not needing to call upon him for marriage pacts, as in another timeline. Rumors reached Ned that Robb was heading deeper south into the Riverlands, his mother at his side, accompanied by Tully forces. Rather than forging directly into a confrontation with Tywin, Robb awaited orders from Ned, who advised caution. If Tywin marched east, the combined might of the Tullys in the north could flank him. Meanwhile, Stannis moved. Letters bearing his seal arrived in Storm's End and King's Landing denouncing Renly's claim as usurpation. Stannis declared himself the only rightful heir of Robert Baratheon, demanding that all loyal men forsake Renly. The letters were scathing, packed with references to the laws of inheritance, and carried the unyielding tone of a man who believed absolutely in his right. Renly laughed bitterly when he read the letter. "That is my brother," he said. "He would sooner see the realm burn than bow to me." Ned was troubled, though. What if Stannis attacks the city by sea? We cannot risk that. Now, Renly answered, he hasn't the numbers to take King's Landing by assault, not if I hold the Tyrell and Stormland fleets plus the city watch. He might try to blockade us, but that would be folly if Tywin's land forces come from the other direction. Stannis is not a fool, but he is prideful. He may gather what strength he can, then wait for an opportune moment. We must be prepared for that. Perhaps, if we secure the realm swiftly, we can sue for peace. Stannis' pride might yield if was chosen over Elming Angen. Renly left the threat unspoken. Ned did not like it, but war might come from more than one direction. Within a fortnight, a raven arrived from the west, Tywin Lannister's seal, in golden wax. Tyrion, Ned and Renly examined the letter in the small council chamber, the doors guarded by loyal men. Tywin's tone was curt and guarded. He proposed a parley, but demanded it be on neutral ground, and insisted that both Joffrey and Cersei be present. Renly refused this condition out of hand, unwilling to relinquish his most valuable leverage. Tyrion read the letter again, expression unreadable. "My father will not yield," the dwarf observed. "Not if you keep his daughter and his grandson locked up. But if you do bring them, he might try to seize them by force. Do be careful." Renly sighed. "We can propose a compromise. We can meet near Harrenhal, on the shores of the God's Eye, with heavy guard. Cersei and Joffrey remain in King's Landing, but we bring other highborn hostages of House Lannister. Say you, Lord Tyrion." Tyrion gave an ironic half-bow. "Delightful. But perhaps we should just skip the pretense. We all know how these parleys tend to go. Someone draws a sword, and the slaughter begins." Nobly. Despite Tyrion's cynicism, they sent another missive west to propose meeting at Harrenhal with no immediate exchange of hostages, but assurances of safe passage. The Lannisters did not respond for weeks. Instead, scouts reported that Tywin was on the march, circumventing Harrenhal, heading toward the Riverlands. Whether he aimed to draw the Stark and Tully forces out, or planned to continue east toward King's Landing, none could say for sure. Robb Stark, with Catelyn at his side, weighed his move carefully. If he marched west to meet Tywin, he risked a pitched battle with a larger force. But if he remained idle, Tywin might slip past him or ravage the Tully lands. So Robb advanced in measured steps, using the terrain to his advantage, setting traps along the Red Fork, establishing supply lines with the Tullys in River Run. In King's Landing, tension crackled in the air, but an odd sense of normalcy returned, aided by the presence of the Tyrell entourage. Margaery Tyrell arrived in the capital, and she and Renly were formally betrothed in a lavish ceremony. The High Septon officiated, his voice echoing in the Great Sept of Baelor. Many lords and ladies murmured that this signaled the dawn of a new power center, Baratheon and Tyrell united. Renly wore a cloak of brilliant green cloth of gold. Margaery was radiant in her own gown of Tyrell green embroidered with golden roses. Ned attended only out of duty, standing solemnly beside his daughter Sansa, who watched the spectacle wide-eyed. Arya fidgeted, uninterested in the pomp. Renly, for his part, stole a moment to speak quietly to Ned after the ceremony. "We will need your daughter's presence at the feast, my lord. It will reassure many of these southern lords to see House Stark standing with us." Ned acquiesced, though he disliked putting Sansa on display. The feast that followed was a grand affair, bright with music and laughter, though overshadowed by the knowledge that war lurked beyond the city walls. Cersei and Joffrey sat not at the high table, but in a smaller gallery overlooking the proceedings, guarded by a ring of watchful Stormland knights. Joffrey's face was a picture of sullen fury, while Cersei's expression was carefully schooled, unreadable in the torchlight. At one point in the feast, Margaery rose and addressed the assembled lords. "I welcome you all," she said, "and I pray for the health of the realm. May our union bring new life and peace to the Seven Kingdoms, a realm united in prosperity." There was polite applause. Ned, observing her, realized she was composed, a practiced performer at courtly intrigue. She would have thrived at any southern court. When the applause died down, Renly also stood. "I pledge to you," he told the lords and ladies, "that as king I will not rest until peace reigns across Westeros. Too long have we allowed old grudges and the ambitions of a few to tear us apart. With the help of Lord Eddard Stark, and all of you, we will show the realm a better way." Ned noted the pointed absence of any reference to Stannis. It was best left unspoken for now. Days later, their illusions of a peaceful resolution began to crumble. News arrived that Tywin Lannister's forces had clashed with the River Lords along the Red Fork. Gregor Clegane had been rampaging in the countryside, burning villages. Cat and Robb had responded in force, driving the Mountain's men back and capturing a key crossing. But the Lannister host was still huge. Ned and Renly realized that simply sitting in King's Landing, waiting for Tywin's next move, was foolish. They needed to bring the fight to him, or at least mount a proper defense in the field. If they could best Tywin Lannister, they might force him to negotiate. Renly resolved to ride out, leading a grand host composed of Stormland knights, Tyrell bannermen, and some of the Crownland's lords who had decided to align with him. Ned would follow with a strong contingent of Northmen and city-based forces, once Robb advanced from the Riverlands, so they could converge and trap Tywin's army between them. Before departing, they had to settle the question of who would command King's Landing. Sir Barristan Selmy agreed to remain behind with a corps of loyal men to defend the city, ensuring that Cersei and Joffrey did not escape, and that no unrest flared up among the populace. The Highgarden fleet was anchored at Blackwater Bay, a deterrent against any naval assault by Stannis. The plan was set. On the day Renly's host marched from the city, Sansa and Arya watched from the walls. Margaery accompanied her new husband, dressed in lighter armor than a typical knight would wear, but symbolic of her determination to support him. Bright banners whipped in the wind, the golden rose of House Tyrell, the stag of House Baratheon, sometimes combined with the dire wolf of House Stark. Thousands of men on horseback and foot moved in a great column, shimmering in the summer sun. The clatter of steel and the sound of hooves echoed throughout the city. Ned Stark, for his part, embraced both daughters before leaving. "Stay safe," he told them. "Sir Barristan is a man of honor. He will protect you. Listen to him." Then, with a lingering look that spoke volumes of fatherly worry, he rode out at the head of his own contingent of Northmen. By his side were the faithful men he had brought from Winterfell. Jory Castle had died in another timeline. But here, thanks to the swift coup, Jory still lived, riding beside his lord with a proud banner in hand. The roads were crowded with soldiers heading west, and soon King's Landing was left behind. The fields and hills unrolled like a tapestry before them. Renly, Ned, and the Tyrell commanders established a disciplined marching order. Scouts rode out daily, sending back word of Lannister troop movements. The plan was to link up with Robb near the Trident. Weeks of hard marching passed. The nights were spent in canvas pavilions, with the banners snapping overhead. Food supplies were managed carefully, thanks to the Tyrell wagons laden with provisions. Morale remained relatively high, especially among the younger knights who believed they would seize glory in the coming battles. Renly did his best to confer with Ned on strategy, relying on the more seasoned lords for advice. He had once been master of laws and experienced politician, but he lacked the actual warfare experience of his brother Stannis or the older lords. However, with people like Randyll Tarly, a famed commander from the Reach, and some cunning Stormland knights at his disposal, plus Ned's sense of caution and discipline, the host marched with purpose. On a crisp morning, they found Robb Stark's forces camped near a broad ford of the Trident. The meeting between father and son was emotional. Ned dismounted and embraced Robb, who had grown more confident in the months since he'd left Winterfell. Catelyn stood by, relief etched on her face as she saw her husband safe. The combined armies now swelled to a staggering size, easily matching Tywin's numbers, if not exceeding them. Catelyn observed Renly with cool appraisal. She recognized that though he was affable, he could be ruthless in pursuit of his goals. Nonetheless, she saw the need for unity. "It is good that you have formed this alliance," she told Ned privately. "The alternative would have been devastating for the realm, and for our family." Ned nodded. He kept returning to that small godswood in King's Landing, to the moment he had decided to align with Renly instead of forging alone or relying solely on Stannis' claim. Perhaps it was unorthodox, but the alternative was an endless cycle of bloodshed. Their war council gathered in Robb's command tent that evening. Renly, Margaery, Ned, Robb, Catelyn, Randyll Tarly, Greatjon Umber, Roose Bolton, who was ironically quiet, though his pale eyes missed nothing, and others. They pored over maps of the Riverlands, discussing the best approach to corner Tywin. They soon agreed. Tywin was near the ruins of a small castle west of the Red Fork, preparing a defensive position. Jaime, commanding a vanguard, harried Tully outriders but had thus far avoided large engagements. If the newly formed Grand Alliance advanced in full force, Tywin would either have to retreat west, giving up the Riverlands, or stand and fight. "We want him to fight," Robb said, a new steel in his voice that reminded Ned of his younger self. "He has terrorized the Riverlands too long." Randyll Tarly nodded curtly. "We can draw him into open battle. If we strike swiftly, we might even capture him. That would break Lannister power at once." "No." Renly stroked his short beard thoughtfully. "But we should remember that Tywin might still have allies we do not know of. We must not be overconfident. He could surprise us with a flanking maneuver, or by calling in reinforcements from the west." Ned, silent thus far, folded his arms. "We have the advantage of numbers, but we must not forget cunning. Tywin is cunning. Let us plan carefully. We can send out false signals that we mean to cross the Red Fork in one place, then cross elsewhere." They devised a plan. Tarly's contingent, along with Robb's outriders, would feint a crossing upstream, drawing Tywin's attention. Meanwhile, Ned, Renly, and the main host would cross downstream and sweep in. If successful, Tywin might be caught against the river. All was set. At dawn 2 days later, the plan was in motion. The thundering of hooves, the shouts of captains, the flutter of banners all signaled the approach of battle. In the distance, smoke rose from burnt villages. The Riverlands bore the scars of Tywin's campaigns. Near midday, Robb led a bold sally upstream, setting up makeshift bridges and campfires to feign a major crossing. Tywin's outriders rushed to intercept, and soon the clamor of steel could be heard echoing across the water. Meanwhile, Renly's main force advanced with measured steps downstream. Ned rode near the vanguard, steel in his eyes. The men from the north marched with grim determination, flanked by the Tyrell Foot and the Stormland Knights. When the two sides clashed at last, the air filled with the roar of men, the clang of sword upon shield, the thunder of horses. Tywin's lines were disciplined, men in crimson cloaks forming a solid wall, commanded by Kevin Lannister in the center. The gold lion on their banners seemed to snarl against the sun. Renly's knights charged, the likes of Loras Tyrell at the forefront, bright armor gleaming as they crashed into the Lannister lines. Renly himself fought valiantly, though surrounded by a retinue ensuring his safety. Ned Stark led a portion of the northern infantry, shield locked with shield, pressing forward through a swirl of dust and blood. Arrows whistled overhead. He glimpsed Robb's banners further north, meaning the feint had transformed into a real engagement. The Greatjon was bellowing war cries in the thick of it, brandishing a huge battle axe. Margaery Tyrell stayed behind the lines, but she was not idle. She oversaw the supply wagons, ensuring fresh arms and water reached the men, commanding a small guard that protected the baggage train. Occasionally, she would send her maids to tend to the wounded, unafraid to step beyond the standard role of a highborn lady. The first day of fighting ended inconclusively. Both sides withdrew at dusk, battered, reorganizing lines for the next day. Tywin had not been routed, but he had not broken their lines either. Night brought uneasy rest. Pyres flickered and the groans of the injured carried across the gloom. By dawn, renewed fighting ignited. This time Robb pressed from the north, forcing Tywin to shift forces in that direction, leaving a gap in the southern flank. Renly and Ned capitalized on that opening with a concentrated thrust of Stormland Knights and Northern Foot. They hammered into the Lannisters, driving them back from the river's edge. Kevan Lannister attempted a regroup, but the unstoppable momentum of the combined force was too great. Still, Tywin himself was nowhere to be seen on the main lines. Ned suspected the old lion might be orchestrating a fallback or planning another cunning ruse. But the allied forces had the advantage of raw numbers and the unity that had thus far held. In a moment that could define the entire war, Tywin's center buckled. Lannister men began to panic, some throwing down their weapons to flee. Jaime Lannister appeared amid the chaos, clad in gilded armor, that famous white cloak swirling, trying to rally the men. He fought with lethal grace, cutting down any who stood before him. At one point he nearly cut his way toward Ned, but Renly's guard intervened. The fighting raged around them, swirling like a deadly whirlpool of steel. Then the horns blew from the west, an urgent, desperate sound. Reinforcements? Ned's heart clenched. But, in fact, it was the cry of retreat. The Lannisters' lines were collapsing. Tywin, it seemed, had decided to withdraw to safer ground. Amid the rout, Jaime kept fighting until Kevan Lannister physically pulled him away. They galloped west, a rear guard of Lannister knights forming a shield around them. Some portion of Tywin's host was able to retreat in ragged columns, but the allies pressed hard, capturing many. By midday the battlefield was soaked in blood, but the Lannisters had been decisively defeated in that engagement. As Ned surveyed the aftermath, broken banners, dead men in red cloaks scattered like autumn leaves, he felt a grim satisfaction tempered by sorrow for the fallen. War was war, no matter how righteous one's cause. The sight of men lying in mud and gore never brought him any joy. Renly rode up, helmet tucked under one arm, sweat beading on his brow. "We've pushed them back," he said, breathless. "A great victory." Ned nodded. "We should not let them regroup. But we must be wary of pursuit. Tywin is a fox. He will lead us into a trap if we chase him blindly." Robb arrived, his sword still stained red, a cut along his cheek. Catelyn followed with guards, her face ashen at the carnage around. "Father," Robb said, "we've driven them back. We took many captives. The Greyjohn has seen to them, and to any of our own men who might be wounded." Renly gazed at the battlefield with a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "Let us gather our war council, decide how best to press this advantage." So they met again, amid the stench of death and the cries of injured men. Randyll Tarly proposed an immediate pursuit. "We can trap Tywin before he crosses back into the Westerlands. We should cut him down while he is disorganized." Ned, ever cautious, wanted to regroup and resupply first. But Tarly argued that speed was essential. Robb favored the bold approach as well. Finally, a compromise was struck. They would pursue Tywin, but in an organized manner, ensuring supply lines. In the days that followed, the Allied army moved west, hounding Tywin's heels. The Lannisters attempted to burn bridges behind them, but the Allies managed to rebuild or find alternate crossings. Skirmishes flared on the roads, but Tywin's main force avoided a pitched battle, seeking to reach the safety of the Westerlands. Their cavalry rear guard, led by Jaime, was formidable enough to keep the Allies from swarming them. Word came by Raven that Stannis had landed some forces in the Stormlands, trying to retake Storm's End from the men Renly had left behind. This was troubling news for the new king, but he could not break off from the chase. He left instructions for Courtney Penrose to hold the fortress as best he could. Eventually, Tywin withdrew to the Golden Tooth, a strong defensive point on the border of the Westerlands. There, he had the advantage of terrain. The Allies paused, uncertain if they should storm the fortress or attempt to outflank it. A siege seemed inevitable, which could drag on for weeks or months. Tensions rose in the Allied camp. Renly convened another war council, and Tyrion, who had been brought along as a half-guest, half-prisoner, was invited to speak. Tyrion shrugged. "You've cornered my father on his own ground. He will not yield easily. He has gold, fortifications, and the will to fight. If you assault him directly, you'll pay a dear price." Renly rubbed his forehead. "Is there any chance to negotiate now, after we've won such a victory?" Tyrion smirked. "You have a better chance now than before, certainly. But you also humiliated him in the field, captured many Lannister knights, and hold my sister and nephew hostage. My father might rather fight to the death than let such an insult pass." On the other hand, even Tywin Lannister might consider an honorable surrender if the alternative is losing everything. Ned turned to Tyrion. Do you believe your father truly would accept Renly's coronation, relinquishing Joffrey's claim? Tyrion closed his eyes for a moment. It's a bitter draft for him, but perhaps there is a chance, if the demands are not too humiliating, and if House Lannister can retain its wealth and influence. The question is, does Renly truly trust the Lannisters afterward? And do the Lannisters trust him? Renly exchanged a glance with Ned. Trust is in short supply, but if it ends this war... Catelyn spoke softly. We cannot forget that war also brews with Stannis. Perhaps if we secure a peace with Tywin now, we can turn to face Dragonstone. Or we can try to broker a settlement with Stannis if we appear unassailable. Reluctantly, they decided to send an envoy under a flag of truce. Tyrion offered to ride out to speak with Tywin personally, but Renly was wary of letting Tyrion go freely. The alternative was to select another messenger. In the end, Tyrion was allowed to go, but accompanied by a sizable escort of Tyrell and Stark men, including the vigilant Greatjon, ensuring Tyrion could not slip away. They rode to a vantage point near the Golden Tooth, where a small Lannister party emerged from the fortress gates. Tywin Lannister himself led them, dressed in ornate but practical armor, the sun gleaming off the gold accents. His face was hard as chiseled stone. Jaime was at his side, expression tight. Tyrion and the Greatjon approached carefully, raising white banners. The tension was thick enough to slice. Greatjon Umber looked ready to fight at the slightest provocation, towering over Tyrion, who wore only a simple tunic and a half-cloak in Lannister crimson and gold. Tywin's voice carried over the wind. Tyrion, you come under a truce from our enemies? Tyrion gave a short bow. Father, I come to negotiate if such a thing is possible. Tywin's lips curled in disdain, but he said, Speak then. The conversation took place with both sides in earshot. Tyrion laid out Renly's terms. Cersei and Joffrey would remain in honorable custody for the time being, perhaps to be released eventually to Casterly Rock under certain conditions. The Westerlands would keep its autonomy and wealth. The Lannisters would pay a nominal tribute to acknowledge Renly's overlordship, and Tywin would recognize Renly as king. Tywin listened, his expression growing colder. When Tyrion finished, he said, These terms are humiliating. We do not accept them. Cersei is my daughter, Joffrey my grandson. The notion that they remain hostages is not one I can abide. Now it tell. Tyrion tried to reason with him, speaking quickly about the might of the allied host, the futility of a drawn-out war. He pointed out that if Tywin fought on, he risked losing everything if the siege escalated. Tywin's hand flexed on the pommel of his sword. And what of the butcher's bill your so-called allies have inflicted upon us? My men lie rotting in the fields, while stark crows hold my kin captive. I will not grovel before Renly Baratheon. If you believe that, you are a bigger fool than I took you for. Tyrion sighed. Father, you can still salvage this. We can demand some concessions, perhaps release of Joffrey upon the signing of a peace treaty, or a dowry arrangement, or... Jaime cut in, voice tight with anger. We should never have parleyed. This talk of concessions is madness. We are Lannisters. Greatjon Umber bristled at Jaime's tone, but Tyrion held up a hand to keep the big man from speaking. Very well, Tyrion said, turning back to Tywin. If you refuse, then the war continues. But know this, we have the Tyrells, the North, the Stormlands, the Riverlands, and King's Landing. You are alone. Do you truly expect to prevail? Indeed. Tywin's cold gaze didn't flicker. A cornered lion is the most dangerous kind. Tell your King Renly that if he wants my submission, he must come take it. I will not yield. And so, the parley ended. Tyrion parted ways with his father on tense terms, returning to the allied camp with nothing to show but frustration. Renly's war council concluded that they must prepare for a siege, or perhaps outflank the Golden Tooth. Time stretched on with smaller skirmishes flaring along the supply lines. Meanwhile, troubling messages from the Stormlands indicated Stannis' army had besieged Storm's End in earnest, blockading the fortress. The men inside were loyal, but how long could they hold out? Renly faced a dreadful choice: continue pressing Tywin or break off a large chunk of his forces to relieve Storm's End. Either route risked handing an advantage to one enemy or the other. At last, after many councils and arguments, Renly and Ned decided on a divided approach. Robb Stark would lead a sizable force to maintain pressure on Tywin at the Golden Tooth. Meanwhile, Renly himself, along with the Tyrells, would march south with the bulk of the army to relieve Storm's End and face Stannis head-on. The risk was that Tywin, if he sensed weakness, might sally forth and crush Robb's contingent. But they reasoned that Robb's Tully and northern men, reinforced by some Stormlords, might hold out. Robb took the responsibility with quiet confidence. "I will not let Tywin pass," he vowed. "If he tries to break out, we'll harass him, cut off his supplies. Sooner or later he must yield, or starve." Ned, torn between supporting Robb and following Renly, nearly decided to remain with his son. But Renly pressed him. "I need you to help me face Stannis. The men look to your honor. If we are to avoid a bloodbath among Baratheons, your presence might be the final push. Perhaps we can negotiate with Stannis more easily if you speak for us." Reluctantly, Ned agreed, though it pained him to leave Robb. Father and son clasped hands. "You have grown, Robb," Ned said. "Be watchful. Tywin is cunning. Ned, and you, father, take care around Stannis," Robb replied with the smallest quirk of a smile. "From what I hear, he is cold and unyielding." They parted ways. Robb and a strong force set about establishing a siege of sorts around Tywin's position at the Golden Tooth. Ned and Renly, with the bulk of the allies, turned south. Catelyn chose to accompany Ned, anxious that her father in Riverrun was safe enough, and wanting to support her husband in any negotiations that might come with Stannis. Thus began another long march. The men grumbled, back and forth across half the realm, chasing one enemy after another. But they marched nonetheless, for the alliance was strong, and the cause still felt just too many. Renly's easy charm helped morale. He rode among the men, joking with them, praising their courage. Margaery rode at his side, an almost queenly presence that buoyed spirits. Ned spent the time in quiet reflection, occasionally conversing with Randyll Tarly or other High Lords about strategy. But as they neared the Stormlands, the rains came, drenching them in summer storms that turned roads into mud. Movement slowed. Ahead, Storm's End stood perched above the sea, battered by crashing waves. Stannis' banners, white with the fiery heart, signifying his new association with the Lord of Light, if rumors were true, hung from siege towers. The fortress's mighty walls had withstood sieges before, famously during Robert's rebellion. But the men within were short on supplies. Renly's host approached from the north, seeking to break the blockade. Scouts reported that Stannis' force, while smaller, was not negligible. He had ships blockading from the sea, and men encircling from the land. The shadow of Melisandre, the Red Priestess who accompanied him, loomed over the camp, fueling rumors of dark magic. A pitched battle threatened. Renly established a camp a short ride from Storm's End, on higher ground, letting the rains drain away. From there he sent envoys under a white flag to Stannis, once again proposing negotiation. Stannis responded with a terse message. "Renly must bend the knee. The Iron Throne is mine by right of birth." Fuming, Renly prepared to fight. But Ned urged caution, suggesting he meet Stannis in person. Renly agreed. The next day, they arranged a parley in a neutral clearing near the fortress. Each side arrived with a small escort, tensions crackling in the humid air. Stannis Baratheon stood stiffly in dark leather armor, emblazoned with the flaming heart of the Lord of Light. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes burned with a relentless conviction. Beside him stood Melisandre, red hair bright as fire in the drizzling light, her ruby necklace gleaming ominously. Behind them were a handful of knights loyal to Dragonstone. Renly, astride a fine stallion, wore Baratheon black and gold, the crowned stag on his breastplate. Ned Stark rode beside him, face somber. Margaery was absent. Renly had asked her not to come. Randyll Tarly and a few Stormland lords made up the remainder of Renly's retinue, everyone armed and watchful. The two Baratheon brothers faced each other, the tension in the air palpable. The sound of distant thunder rumbled, echoing across the stormy sky. Stannis spoke first, his voice low and grim. "You have usurped my rightful throne, Renly. Our brother Robert is dead. By all the laws of inheritance, the crown is mine. Why do you persist in defiance?" Netai. Renly's eyes flashed. Defiance. You speak as though you have the love of the realm, but you do not. The Stormlands, the Reach, the North, they rally to me. You have but a fraction of the kingdom at your back. Stannis' glare hardened. The law is not about who is beloved, but who is right. I have sent ravens to every corner of the realm. I have declared the truth of Cersei's bastards. Yet you, my own brother, stand in the way. You claim the throne for yourself on no basis but your popularity. Bend the knee, Renly, and I will pardon you for this treason. Nagarzadi. Renly clenched his fists. I will not bend. The realm needs a king who can unite it, who can inspire loyalty. That man is not you, brother. You are as cold as the wall. The lords will never rally to your name. Stannis looked about to retort, but Ned Stark interjected. My lords Baratheon, listen, he said, voice grave. We are on the brink of plunging the entire realm into endless war. Tywin Lannister remains a threat to the west, though we dealt him a blow. The Iron Islands might stir. And beyond the narrow sea, dragons are rumored to stir as well. We cannot afford another war among ourselves. Nice. Stannis' gaze shifted to Ned, the corner of his mouth twitching as if suppressing anger. Lord Stark, I respected you once, as did Robert. You alone recognized the truth about the Boy King. But you have turned from it. Why do you stand with Renly? Ned took a measured breath. I stand with the man who can end this madness swiftly and restore peace. The realm bleeds, Lord Stannis, and you would press a claim that most lords do not accept. I respect the law, but not at the cost of thousands of lives. Will you not yield for the sake of the realm? No. Stannis' face hardened further. Melisandre spoke for the first time, her voice soft, with a strange undertone of power. The Lord of Light has shown us the path. Azor Ahai reborn shall take up the flaming sword and purge the darkness. We cannot yield to false kings. This war is righteous. Ned felt a chill. We do not seek to deny any man his faith, my lady. But is this truly the will of your God, to see brother fight brother? Melisandre's red lips curved slightly. Sometimes the fires demand sacrifice. Renly, impatience coloring his tone, said, Enough of this. Brother, if you will not bend the knee, then we will do what must be done. Our forces outnumber yours 4-1. You cannot hold Storm's End. Stannis' hand went to his sword hilt. Then do your worst. The parley dissolved into silence, and each side withdrew. That night, Ned was visited by uneasy dreams, visions of a shadow with the shape of a man, swords clashing in darkness, a swirl of red light. He woke in a cold sweat, unsure if it was only the tension or something more sinister. At dawn, the armies arrayed themselves. Stannis' men formed a smaller circle around the fortress, the sea at their backs, warships out in the bay. Renly's larger host spread across the approach, bright banners flapping in the stormy breeze. A downpour threatened, but the men took up arms regardless. Renly planned to break the siege lines, open the way to Storm's End, and crush Stannis' forces. If all went well, Stannis might be captured. Randyll Tarly led one flank, the Tyrell Knights forming the other, with the Stormland troops in the center. Ned Stark commanded a large portion of infantry. They advanced. Horns blew, thunder rumbled, and the ground trembled under the weight of thousands of men and horses. Stannis' lines braced themselves. Arrows flew in black clouds. Men fell, trampled by the pounding charge. Ned pressed forward with his infantry, shield raised. The ring of steel was deafening. Rain began to fall in sheets, slicking the ground, making footing treacherous. Storm's End loomed behind the chaos, its walls unyielding. Stannis himself was seen on a rise, sword in hand, directing his men with grim precision. Melisandre stood near him, seemingly unafraid of the flying arrows, her red cloak flowing like blood against the storm-gray sky. At one point, a swirl of flame seemed to burst from a siege tower, igniting the rainy gloom with an eerie glow, but it was quickly snuffed by the downpour. Renly rode at the head of the Stormland Knights, crashing into Stannis' flank. The clash was brutal and short. Stannis' men, outnumbered, began to give way. Suddenly, a figure in battered plate, Sir Garland Tyrell, or perhaps Loras, charged straight into the thick of the fray, driving a wedge in Stannis' line. But Stannis rallied some of his best knights and turned the tide momentarily. Steel rang. Men cried out. Ned fought through swirling mud, the wind lashing his cloak. He glimpsed Renly engaged in a fierce sword duel with a grim-faced Baratheon bannerman. Renly disarmed the man, leaving him sprawled in the mud. Slowly, inevitably, the weight of numbers prevailed. Stannis' line began to buckle. Men deserted or surrendered, some trying to flee for the ships. But archers along the shore let fly volley after volley. The sea turned red with the blood of those who tried to swim. Stannis himself, a dark silhouette amid the storm, refused to yield. Then came the moment that would define the battle. Stannis, seeing his men crumble, advanced alone toward Renly's position. He called out, voice raw, "Renly, fight me single combat! Settle this with honor!" Renly, breathing hard, reined in his horse. Men around him parted, uncertain. Ned nearby called out, "Your Grace, do not do this, he is desperate." But Renly, stung by the challenge, wheeled his horse around. "I will face him," he said, brandishing his sword. "He has no right to call me craven." A ring of men formed around them, an impromptu arena, in the midst of the muddy field. Rain drummed on armor. Stannis on foot, helmet lost somewhere, gripped his longsword in both hands. Renly dismounted, handing his reins to a squire, stepping forward to face his brother. Their gazes met, each full of rage and regret. Stannis attacked first, with measured, powerful blows. Renly parried, but the shock of each strike forced him back a step in the churned mud. Stannis might have been older, less charismatic, but he was a seasoned campaigner. Renly countered with a swift slash, which Stannis deflected with a snarl. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Around them, men held their breath. Ned held his sword at the ready, in case Stannis' men tried something treacherous. He prayed it would not come to that. This was madness, brother against brother. The ring of swords was matched by the crash of thunder overhead. Stannis swung low, and Renly twisted aside, slashing down at his brother's shoulder, but only caught a glancing blow. Stannis let out a grunt, blood seeping through his armor. He lunged, trying to thrust into Renly's torso, but Renly pivoted. Their swords locked for a moment. Faces inches apart, they glared at one another. "Why do you persist?" Stannis hissed. "You cannot break the law of gods and men." Renly shoved him back. "The realm needs a king who can lead it." He lunged, swinging his sword in a wide arc. Stannis blocked, but the force knocked him to his knees in the mud, sword clattering from his grasp. Rain washed over them both. Renly held his blade at Stannis' throat, breath heaving. "Yield," he demanded. Stannis stared up with hatred and sorrow in his eyes. Slowly, he bowed his head. "I cannot. I am the rightful king." Melisandre, somewhere behind the ring of men, cried out, "Do not kneel, my lord. The Lord of Light stands with you." She made a motion with her hands, as though summoning some unseen force. A hush fell. For one interminable moment it seemed something might happen. But the storm raged on, and no miracle transpired to save Stannis. Renly's face twisted. He considered for a moment. Then, with a shaking hand, he said, "Then you leave me no choice." Ned stepped forward quickly, calling out, "Wait, your grace! Spare him, if there's to be peace!" But he was too late. In a single swift motion, Renly's blade slashed across Stannis' throat. Blood poured down, mingling with the rain. A collective gasp went up. Melisandre let out a keening wail. The soldiers stood in stunned silence, the crack of thunder echoing the finality of the deed. Stannis Baratheon, rightful or not, crumpled to the mud. Renly stood there, sword dripping red, rain plastering his hair to his face. His expression was something like horror at what he had done. He had killed his own brother. The realm would call it regicide or fratricide, perhaps, but it was war. Melisandre rushed forward, but Stormland knights blocked her. She fell to her knees by Stannis' body, eyes blazing with fury as she looked at Renly. "You have slain a chosen of our lore. This is a great sin." Renly, half-dazed, turned away. Ned lowered his head, feeling an ache in his heart. No matter the justification, the horror of brother killing brother seemed to echo the madness that had engulfed the realm. With Stannis dead, his forces surrendered or fled. Storm's End was relief. Renly took possession of the fortress, ensuring it was stocked and guarded. Melisandre vanished in the night, leaving chaos in her wake. The Red Woman was rumored to have escaped by a small boat, perhaps carrying the seeds of vengeance. Ned found Renly in the castle's courtyard the next morning, rain still drizzling from the gray sky. The king stood by a well, gazing into the water, as if searching for solace. When Ned approached, Renly spoke without turning. "I did what had to be done," he said, his voice hollow. "But the taste of it is bitter." Ned nodded. "War is always bitter, Your Grace." Renly sighed and looked at him. "We must press on. There is still Tywin Lannister to deal with, and the possibility of other threats. But let us pray the realm can heal from this." Back at the Golden Tooth, Robb Stark pressed Tywin's forces as best he could, holding them in check. Word of Stannis' death soon spread across the land. Some Stormlords who had supported Stannis grudgingly bent the knee to Renly. Others fled or took to piracy. In King's Landing, Cersei and Joffrey remained hostages under tight guard, their fates uncertain. Tyrion Lannister remained with the allied forces, watching everything with wary eyes. As the wheel of war continued to turn, the realm saw a major shift. Two of the would-be kings, Joffrey and Stannis, had effectively been removed from the board, one a captive, the other dead. Renly Baratheon, with Ned Stark at his side, ruled in King's Landing through the force of arms and a patchwork of alliances. Tywin Lannister was cornered but not yet defeated, refusing to submit. And across the sea, whispers of dragons in the east began to spread, though for now, that threat remained distant. Standing atop the battlements of Storm's End with Ned, Renly gazed out at the storm-tossed waters. Clouds churned overhead, lightning flickering in the distance. Renly's voice was quiet. "I never wanted it to come to this, Ned. Killing Stannis, besieging Tywin, holding a child hostage. These are not the things I dreamed of when Robert wore the crown. But if I must do them to save the realm, so be it." Ned's face was solemn, lined with care. "We make choices, Your Grace, and we do what we believe is right. But remember that the realm is large, and its memory is long. Win or lose, the scars of this war will remain. We must be ready to heal them, not just sew them shut with steel." Renly looked out at the horizon. "I will be a king who heals the land then, or I will die trying." Ned bowed his head, letting the wind carry away their words. In the quiet that followed, he thought of the north, of Winterfell, of simpler days long past. He had begun this journey in search of the truth about the king's heirs. Now, he stood as the right hand of a new king, drenched in the blood of a civil war. Yet he had protected his daughters, spared the north from a direct Lannister invasion, and kept the flame of stability burning, however tenuously. Was that enough? He did not know. Some distance away, on the rocky shore, the tide rolled in ceaselessly, erasing footprints in the sand. Just so, Ned Stark hoped the realm might one day wash away the blood spilled in this war, and find a measure of peace, even if it took generations. The storms would pass, he prayed, and the light of day would shine again upon the Seven Kingdoms. Ned Stark stood on the battlements of Storm's End, after that terrible clash of Baratheon against Baratheon, rain still dripping from his cloak. The scent of the sea was thick in the air, briny and raw. Seawater crashed against the rocky shore below with relentless fury, and above, the sky remained a churn of gray clouds. Renly Baratheon, newly victorious in the south, had turned from the battlements an hour before, vanishing into the depths of the castle to see to his men, and to nurse his own conscience after the slaying of his brother. That image lingered in Ned's mind. Renly's sword at Stannis' throat, the final slash in the mud and rain, with lightning splitting the sky. Every step Ned took across the ancient stones felt heavier than the last, the dull ache of war pressing down on him. He had chosen to support Renly in a desperate bid to avert a bloodier civil war. Yet the very thing he had hoped to avoid, the merciless shedding of kin's blood, had come to pass anyway. The swirl of fate always seemed to mock his best intentions. Beyond the walls, the battered armies reorganized, patching wounds and salvaging what supplies they could from the soggy ground. Some men tended horses, others worked to shelter campfires from the driving wind. Here and there, small pockets of Stormlander and Tyrell soldiers scoured for survivors from Stannis' camp. Most of them had surrendered, kneeling in the mire when it became clear that their rightful liege was dead. Ned was weary of it all. He missed the cold, clean air of the north where life was harsh but straightforward. The intrigues of King's Landing were behind him for a moment, yet new intrigues festered still. Cersei and Joffrey were under guard back in the Red Keep, hostages of a new Baratheon king. Tywin Lannister remained entrenched at the Golden Tooth, locked in a standoff with Robb Stark, who held him pinned. And somewhere across the sea, a Targaryen girl might yet breathe dragonfire back into the world. War and rumor traveled on the same wind. There would be no rest for any of them. When Ned finally left the battlements, the corridors of Storm's End felt close and cold. Torches burned in sconces along the rough-hewn walls, and the castle's ancient stones bore the marks of countless sieges. Outside the Great Hall, a few Stormlander knights stood at attention, saluting Ned as he passed. Within, Renly was holding a grim conference at one of the long tables. Much of the hall was unlit, with only a few torches guttering in sconces, and the flickering illumination lent the gathering a somber air. Seated around the table were Margaery Tyrell, Randyll Tarly, Lord Mathis Rowan, and a handful of other high lords. All wore cloaks still damp from the ceaseless downpour. They spoke in subdued voices. Margaery, though gracious and poised, looked pale. Word of Stannis' death had spread quickly among the Tyrell host, and most hailed it as a victory. Margaery alone, it seemed, recognized the horror that came with any man slaying his own blood. Renly rose to greet Ned as he entered. The new king's face was drawn, shadows beneath his eyes betraying a sleepless night. "Lord Stark," Renly said softly, "we were wondering if you had any news from the north. A raven arrived just now. Perhaps you would read it with us." Ned came forward, and one of the knights presented him a sealed message. The wax bore the dire wolf of House Stark. He broke it open. The missive was short and to the point. "Father, we maintain the siege at the Golden Tooth. Tywin Lannister will not yield, but he stirs little. Our scouts say he has stores enough for a longer holdout. I await your word. The men are restless but in good spirits. The river lords stand by us. We can hold as long as we must. Robb." Ned read it aloud. Renly sank back into his seat. "So Tywin sits, refusing to bend." "As we expected," Randyll Tarly remarked, arms folded across his chest. "He'll let himself be starved out or hope to lure Robb into a rash move. The Lannisters are cunning. It wouldn't shock me if Tywin feigns weakness to draw a portion of Robb's forces away, then strikes when we're divided." Ned lowered the parchment. "We suspected as much. For now, Robb will remain where he is. Our plans have not changed. The question is, do we dare press west ourselves once we've secured Storm's End and the Stormlands?" Renly waved a hand in vague dismissal. "I cannot leave Storm's End until I've settled the matter of who remains in control, and how many men we leave behind to ensure loyalty. And there is the matter of patching up the local garrisons. We must also quell any pockets of resistance from those who may have followed Stannis. But once we're done, yes, we'll march west again. Tywin must be dealt with." He paused, his gaze flicking toward Margaery. "But first, we need to plan, and rest, if only for a night." The great hall quieted. Outside, thunder boomed, as though the storm itself were a witness to their war council. Margaery stood. In a clear, gentle voice, she suggested that the wounded be given the best quarters available. The Tyrells had brought their own maesters, who were setting up a makeshift infirmary in the lower halls. Storm's End had a history of surviving hard sieges, so it contained storerooms that might still hold some supplies for the wounded. Renly assented to everything, barely speaking, a haunted look in his eyes. Ned noticed that many present glanced uneasily at their king. They recognized the weight upon him, a brother's blood on his hands, and the knowledge that many in the realm would whisper that he had committed fratricide for the crown. Even if it was battle, even if Stannis had forced the confrontation, men remembered such deeds. Ned felt a pang of sympathy. He, too, knew the guilt of failing to prevent certain tragedies. The war ground on, and in these swirling tides of power, no one's conscience remained pure. Not long after, the gathering ended, and men drifted away to see to their duties. Ned approached Renly quietly. "Your Grace," he said, voice low. "A word." Renly nodded and led Ned into a smaller solar adjoining the hall. The room had a narrow, arrow-slit window that looked out over the churning sea. A few candles guttered on a table. Rain pattered on the stone sill. Ned paused, considering how to phrase his thoughts. I wanted to speak about Stannis. I know the man was unyielding, and you saw no choice but to fight. But the realm will talk about this, how you struck down your own blood. It may haunt your reign. The Nediho. Renly exhaled, gaze distant. I know. In truth, I didn't expect to kill him, but when he refused to yield, his jaw worked soundlessly. He was never one for bending. I told myself it had to be done for the greater good, to spare thousands more from dying in a protracted war between us. But that doesn't ease the ache. Ned touched Renly's arm. Remember this feeling when you rule. Let it guide your mercy for others. We can't undo what happened, but we can ensure we don't become the monsters others expect us to be. No. Renly managed a wan smile. Wise words, Lord Stark. I'll keep them close to my heart. Later, in the courtyard below, the battered banners of Stannis were torn down by Stormlander soldiers. Those same men then hoisted the crowned stag banners once again, signifying that Storm's End was firmly Renly's. No one voiced open complaint. Stannis' men were largely disarmed and scattered. Some had sworn to Renly under threat of imprisonment. Others had deserted. A handful of Stannis knights, sorrowful and grim, had thrown themselves upon Renly's mercy, which he grudgingly granted. They were permitted to leave if they vowed not to raise arms against him again. In that, at least, Renly showed clemency. Come nightfall, Ned found a quiet corner of the fortress. He climbed a narrow staircase to an upper rampart, wanting solitude. Rain spattered across his face, and the sea wind tugged at his hair. Once upon a time years ago, he had stood on the battlements of Winterfell, listening to the howling of wolves. So much had changed since then. His wife and younger son were parted from him, though still in the same war effort. His daughters were in King's Landing, albeit safe under Sir Barristan Selmy's watch. The realm was fracturing and healing in the same breath, and Ned no longer knew what tomorrow would bring. He could not help thinking of the Targaryens as well. Whispers of dragons had drifted across the sea. If Daenerys truly lived and had somehow hatched real dragons, that would change everything. House Targaryen had once spanned the realm with flame and terror. Robert's rebellion had put an end to that line, or so they believed. If the Targaryen princess returned in the midst of this chaos, Westeros might tear itself apart anew. Below, lanterns glimmered in the castle yard, illuminating the hush of exhausted men bedding down. No songs drifted up tonight, only the hush of the storm. With a weary sigh, Ned turned from the view and found his way to a small chamber assigned to him. Sleep was fitful, haunted by flickers of memory, Cersei's mocking smile, Robert's boisterous laugh, Stannis' body collapsing, the weirwood trees of the north, and the uncertain gaze of his children. He had chosen this path to protect them, but at what cost? Morning dawned with a pearly gray sky and a lessening of the rain. Servants scurried to cook a meager breakfast, distributing bread and hard cheese. Some Stormland lords who had turned their coats from Stannis came to pledge fealty to Renly anew, hoping for pardon. A few had retreated to keep their heads low, anticipating retribution, but Renly had other concerns. He spent the morning rallying the fortress, consulting with the garrison commander to see what repairs Storm's End needed. Ned joined him discussing logistical matters, food stocks, weapon supplies, horses. With Stannis' blockade ended, ships could once again come into port, bringing trade from the Narrow Sea or from King's Landing. That, at least, would stave off any starvation. Around midday, Margaery Tyrell mustered a small retinue to visit the local villages. She hoped to distribute some relief supplies, show a queenly face, and quell any rebellion brewing among the peasantry. Ned admired her determination, though it unsettled him to see how seamlessly she played the role of consort, even in war. The Tyrell rose was in full bloom, and Margaery seemed determined to ensure everyone smelled its fragrance. Meanwhile, Randyll Tarley, who had proven an able field commander, hounded Renly to march once again. This victory does us little good if we linger, Tarley warned, eyes cool. The Lannisters remain at large to the west. Our men grow weary of being split in two. Finish your business here, your grace, and let us move on. Die. Renly nodded, brow furrowing. Soon. There are still a few Stannis loyalists in the Stormlands, smaller keeps that might test us, but we can stamp them out with a lesser force. He glanced at Ned. Perhaps we can leave a portion of the Tyrell men under Tarly's command to pacify the region, while the bulk of us head west. I don't want to spend the entire summer chasing small rebellions. Tarly rubbed his chin. That would be acceptable. As long as I have enough men to handle any pockets of resistance, I can secure the Stormlands for you. Now I saw. Ned added, we should also consider the Ironborn. Word might reach Balon Greyjoy that the realm is divided, tempting him to strike the coasts. He once rebelled against the crown during your brother's reign, and it could happen again. Damn, Renly muttered. I'd nearly forgotten that possibility. Balon Greyjoy never lacks ambition. If he sees us tied up in Lannister territory, he might raid the Reach or the Westerlands coast. Even the north. But there's little we can do about that right now. My fleets are needed at King's Landing or to secure Storm's End. Unless we can rally the Redwyne fleet from the Arbor to guard those seas. Ned sighed. Another matter for later. At least for now we hold King's Landing, Cersei and Joffrey. Your hold on the crown is stable enough. No one is going to enthrone a child locked in a tower, no matter what Tywin Lannister claims. Renly gave a thin smile. True. Very well. Let us see to the final securing of Storm's End. By next moon's turn, I intend to march west. Tywin cannot be left to brood behind his walls forever. So, it was decided. Over the next few weeks, Renly and Ned toiled to reorganize the Stormlands. Word spread throughout the region that Stannis was slain and Renly was undisputed Lord of Storm's End. Some minor lords balked, but a stern warning from Tarly's armed contingent saw them bend the knee. Renly showed leniency, refusing to punish anyone too harshly unless they had committed grievous atrocities. It was a political move to appear merciful but also to avoid fueling further rebellion. Meanwhile, scouts continued to gather information about Tywin's forces in the west. The Golden Tooth was entrenched, and Robb Stark's blockade remained. The Lannister supply lines had been disrupted. Some envoys even whispered that internal strife brewed in the Lannister ranks, with Jaime urging a breakout attempt and Tywin refusing. Jaime's pride chafed under siege, while Tywin preferred patience. Letters came from King's Landing, courtesy of ravens entrusted to Sir Barristan Selmy. The old knight wrote that the city was quiet for now, though restive. Food prices were rising, and though the Tyrell supply lines helped, many small folk still whispered in the alleys that war might return. The presence of Joffrey and Cersei as captives was widely known, and some of the population resented the new king. After all, many had been told that Joffrey was Robert's rightful son. But with the Goldcloaks reorganized and loyal to the new regime, open unrest had not broken out. During all this, Ned found himself exchanging letters with his daughters. Sansa's writing was proper and careful, describing how she spent her days in the Red Keep, focusing on her needlework, trying to stay out of the political fray. Arya's letters, short and scribbled, spoke of her practicing swordplay with a few Stormland knights who indulged her. Sir Barristan, she wrote, would sometimes watch, offering the occasional word of advice. Ned allowed himself a small smile reading that, glad Arya's spirit remained unbroken by the gloom of court. Catelyn was still with Robb, likely near the Golden Tooth, so Ned's letters to her went unanswered for a time. He consoled himself that at least she was close to their son, helping him hold the lines. At last, a month after Stannis' defeat, Renly began to prepare his departure from Storm's End. He left Randyll Tarly with a substantial force to restore the Stormlands fully to his control and quell any new rebellions. Margaery, to Ned's mild surprise, insisted on accompanying Renly west. I am your queen, she said firmly. Or I will be once we hold the capital coronation, but I mean to stand by your side in all things. Renly, who had grown fond of Margaery's support, did not refuse her. They began the march northward, retracing their path through the Stormlands, heading toward the Roserad that would lead them across the Reach, and eventually toward the Riverlands. The columns were large but not as massive as before. Some men had remained behind to garrison Storm's End, others had been left to protect King's Landing. Still, it was an imposing host, with bright banners snapping in the wind. The Tyrell Rose, the Baratheon Stag, and the Stark Direwolf mingled in unity as they trudged onward. Because the war had ranged far, the roads were sometimes in poor condition, with signs of looting or small skirmishes. For the most part, though, the people they encountered were relieved that a large, organized host under the Crown's banner was passing through. It promised an end to random pillaging. Margaery, never missing an opportunity to gather goodwill, made sure to pay fair coin for any supplies they took. At the small towns they passed, she gave courtesy visits to the local septs, praying for the souls lost in the war, distributing bread and barley from the Tyrell wagons. The small folk responded with cheers, impressed by her generosity, whispering that perhaps this was a queen who would bring gentler days. In the evenings, Renly typically held court in a pavilion. Nobles and knights would gather to discuss strategy, but also to press local disputes for the king's judgment. Ned attended, listening quietly as Renly tried to dispense a semblance of justice. Though inexperienced, Renly had a certain charm that made petitioners feel heard, even if he did not always have the perfect solution. Ned found himself stepping in at times to offer guidance, drawing on his years ruling the north with a just but firm hand. One night, as they camped near a broad stretch of rolling hills, a messenger arrived at speed, heralding from the Golden Tooth. The man was muddy and exhausted but insisted on seeing King Renly and Lord Stark at once. Once admitted to their command pavilion, he fell to one knee. "My lords," he gasped, "I bring word from the forces besieging Tywin Lannister. Lord Robb sends news. Tywin has attempted to break out. There was a battle near the foothills west of the Tooth. Losses on both sides, but the Lannisters were driven back." No. Renly's eyes lit with urgency. Tywin tried to escape. He must be desperate. The messenger nodded. But there's more. Lord Robb captured Jaime Lannister in the battle. The Kingslayer is a prisoner. A murmur rippled through the pavilion. Jaime Lannister, one of the realm's finest swordsmen, was famed for his cunning and skill, and for slaying the Mad King, which some said made him heroic, others said made him a dishonorable assassin. For him to be captured was a major blow to the Lannisters. Ned asked, "And Tywin?" Tywin escaped back behind his defenses. He left Jaime behind, whether intentionally or not we do not know. The old lion is pinned once more, but rumor says he's livid with fury. Lord Robb holds Jaime under heavy guard. He plans to send a raven with more details, but the bird might arrive after me. Renly's mouth curved into a slow smile. This is excellent news. Without Jaime, Tywin's morale might crumble. My nephew, and let's call him that, whether or not he's truly Robert's, well, Joffrey is captive in King's Landing, and now Jaime is a prisoner in Robb's camp. The Lannisters are running out of powerful figures to rally behind. Ned's expression, however, was guarded. Tywin is at his most dangerous when cornered. Even wounded animals can lash out. We should not underestimate him? Indeed, Renly agreed. But we have an advantage now. Once we rejoin Robb near the Golden Tooth, we can press Tywin from two sides. I suspect the old lion may soon parley again, this time with fewer demands. The messenger handed over a folded parchment, sealed with Robb's wolf sigil. Ned broke it open. Robb's words were brief and to the point, confirming the capture of Jaime, praising the bravery of the men who'd fought, and urging Renly to hurry if they wanted to trap Tywin for good. Ned read it aloud, and the lords in the pavilion nodded approval. Renly wasted no time. "We march at first light," he declared. "No more delays. Let's end this." 2 days later, their host shifted course, no longer traveling by the slower route through the Reach but cutting more directly north and west. The roads were not as fine, but they saved time. Scouts were dispatched far ahead, ensuring no Lannister outriders lurked. Each day, the lines of men marched from dawn to dusk, only stopping long enough to set camp. Tension built, as though they could sense that a final confrontation loomed. By the time they reached the Riverlands, the land was scarred by earlier battles. They saw burnt farmsteads, gutted by Gregor Clegane's raids. Some fields had begun to sprout weeds instead of wheat, as the small folk had fled or been killed. Ned felt the old sorrow return. These were the same lands he had tried to protect when he first came south to confront the Lannisters. War was a plague that devoured good people, innocent and guilty alike. As they advanced, they began to encounter pockets of Northmen and Tully outriders. These were Robb's scouts patrolling the area. One such group led Ned, Renly, and Margaery through a battered village to a vantage point near a series of rolling hills. From there, they could see a mass of tents sprawled in the distance, Robb Stark's encampment. Banners fluttered, the direwolf of House Stark, the trout of House Tully, the flayed man of House Bolton, and many others. It was a sight that made Ned's heart swell with a complicated mixture of pride and dread. Here, his son led a grand army, forging alliances and fighting battles. How much had that boy grown in such a short time? Robb himself rode out to greet them, flanked by a small honor guard. Even at a distance, Ned recognized his features. He looked more like a young lord than a boy now, shoulders squared, a sword at his hip. When they closed the distance, Ned dismounted quickly. Robb did the same, approaching with a wide grin. "Father," Robb said, voice thick with emotion. Ned embraced him, feeling the chainmail press between them. "It's good to see you, my son. You've done well here." Robb's cheeks flushed with pride. "We hold Tywin pinned indeed, though he gave us a fierce fight. The Lannisters are low on supplies, or so our scouts say, but they're too stubborn to surrender. Capturing Jaime was pure chance. He led a reckless charge, hoping to break our lines, and we surrounded him." Renly and Margaery approached then, and Robb bowed respectfully. "Your Grace," he said. "I'm honored you've come." Renly offered a friendly nod. "The honor is mine. Without your help, we wouldn't stand a chance of containing Tywin. Now that we're joined, though, we can force his hand." They proceeded to Robb's war tent, large enough to accommodate the High Lords of both armies. Catelyn Stark waited inside, along with the Great John Umber, Roose Bolton, Edmure Tully, and a handful of other bannermen. Catelyn's face lit up with relief when she saw Ned, and he clasped her hand gently. "Are you well?" he murmured. She nodded. "Well enough. Though I've grown weary of this waiting, I've been praying each day for a swift end to the conflict." Renly and Margaery greeted her with courtesy. Margaery, in her warm, gracious tone, said, "Lady Stark, your son has proven a most capable leader. We are all indebted to his skill." Catelyn's eyes flicked between them, taking measure of the new queen. She inclined her head politely. "Your generosity is appreciated, my lady." When they all gathered around the broad campaign table, the mood was tense but hopeful. The table bore a map of the surrounding region, with wooden markers indicating the positions of Tywin's forces, the Allied lines, and potential supply routes. Robb stood at one side, arms folded across his chest. "Tywin has withdrawn deeper into the foothills. There are natural defensive ridges, and he's made entrenchments. If we assault him head-on, we'll suffer high casualties." Renly studied the map. "Dotty. But we have him outnumbered, do we not?" Edmure Tully cleared his throat. "Overall, yes. But he's chosen strong ground, and while we might eventually starve him out, that process could take months. The man is a rock behind his walls." "No, and that's why." Roose Bolton, with his pale, unsettling eyes, spoke quietly. "Sieges sap morale, and Tywin might attempt a breakout again when we least expect it. We must find a way to lure him into open battle, where our numbers will matter." Ned tapped a spot on the map. "Could we approach from two sides simultaneously? Put enough men on his flanks that he has no choice but to face one or the other?" Robb nodded. "That's what we've tried. Still, Tywin remains behind his fortifications. The ratio of men needed to force him out is greater than we can easily muster without spreading ourselves too thin. Winter may come before we root him out." "Nah." Renly let out a slow breath. "Then perhaps it's time to parley once more. Tywin might be more inclined to talk now that Jaime is our prisoner. We have Cersei, Joffrey, and Jaime, all under our control. 3 pillars of House Lannister. That must sting. We can propose terms again." The Great John rumbled. "We tried that once. Tywin refused." "Times change," Renly said. "Jaime was not captured then. I suspect Tywin may reconsider if he thinks we might execute his golden son. Tywin's love for Jaime is well known." Bolton's lips curved in a hint of a smile. Fear is the most efficient persuader, after all. There was a moment of silent agreement in the tent. Ned, though he disliked the notion of threatening hostages, saw the necessity of it. War demanded harsh measures. The question was how far they were willing to go. Killing Jaime in cold blood would stain their cause deeply, but simply waving the threat around might suffice. The decision was made to send an envoy to Tywin. Renly, Ned, and Robb drafted a letter outlining terms. Tywin was to swear fealty to Renly Baratheon as the king, release any claims that Joffrey might have, acknowledge that Cersei's children were illegitimate, and accept a treaty that maintained Lannister control over the Westerlands, but under the crown's clear authority. In exchange, Jaime would be spared and possibly returned to Casterly Rock under guard, and Cersei, with Joffrey, might eventually be sent to a quiet exile, though that last detail was left vague. The letter ended with a warning that any further resistance would be met with the severest measures. They also added that if Tywin refused, the Allied forces would move relentlessly, piece by piece, until the Westerlands fell. By the time the letter was sealed and dispatched with an escort of 100 cavalry, night had fallen. A sense of anticipation pervaded the camp. Some men stoked fires and told stories of near misses with Lannister blades. Others sharpened swords or polished armor. No one truly wanted to face another drawn-out siege, but all were prepared if they must. Ned retired to his tent alongside Catelyn. They shared a private moment, exhaustion heavy in their bones. She told him quietly of the burdens of watching Robb grow into a commander, of the anxious nights hearing the sounds of distant battle. Ned held her hand. "We've both done what we thought best," he said. "This war, I fear it's changed us all." Catelyn nodded. "We can only hope it ends soon. Then we might try to piece the realm back together. The lords may settle, and perhaps we can see our daughters again." A pang tightened in Ned's chest. "Yes. I'd like that very much." No. They slept fitfully, the sounds of men and horses echoing through the night, the occasional cry from a drunken soldier. But dawn broke with a crispness in the air that felt almost hopeful. It was 3 days before Tywin's response arrived. A lone Lannister herald, dusty from hard riding, approached under a white banner. He was shown into the Allied command tent. The man's face was pale, and he stammered as he presented a sealed letter bearing Tywin's distinctive gold, lion stamp. Renly read it first, eyebrows climbing. Then he passed it to Ned, who read it with a furrowed brow, and handed it on to Robb. In clipped, uncompromising language, Tywin insisted on the immediate release of Jaime, Joffrey, and Cersei, with no admission of wrongdoing or acceptance of Renly's claim. He proposed instead a truce that recognized Renly as Lord of Storm's End while Joffrey would remain the rightful king. It was in essence no concession at all. The tent erupted with anger. The great Jon roared, "The nerve of that golden fool!" Bolton's expression turned cold as ice, while Edmure Tully muttered curses. Robb shook his head in disbelief. "He's still refusing. Does he think we're naive children?" Renly crushed the parchment in his fist. "He's stalling, playing for time, or it's pride. He can't bear to bend. I will not cede the throne to Joffrey. This is madness." Ned looked at the crushed parchment in Renly's hand. "We gave him an offer that was more than fair. He refuses because he wants total victory or nothing. This letter is not an invitation to peace. It's a challenge." Bolton spoke then, voice measured. "We need another approach. Tywin's pride blinds him. Perhaps we should speak with Jaime directly, see if he can persuade his father. Even from captivity, Jaime might hold some sway." "Now, Farnation." Robb gave a small nod. "I've kept Jaime in a secure stockade near the camp's edge, guarded by my best men. He's tried to provoke them, of course, but he remains unharmed. Perhaps it is time we asked him if he wishes to save his family." They decided to do just that. Ned and Robb went together to see Jaime, while Renly remained in the command tent to discuss the next steps with the Tyrell and Tully lords. Soldiers fell in behind Ned and Robb, forming a protective escort. They did not fear that Jaime could do anything on his own, but caution was wise. He was still dangerous, even unarmed. The stockade was a wooden enclosure in a corner of the camp, surrounded by sharpened stakes. Within, a handful of Lannister knights were also held captive, though separated from their commander. Jaime Lannister had a small private cell that overlooked little more than a muddy yard. When Robb approached, the guard snapped to attention. He addressed the guard captain, "Open the gate. My father and I will speak with the Kingslayer." The door creaked as they entered. Jaime sat on a low wooden bench in the corner wearing a simple tunic and breeches. His once lustrous golden hair was matted, his face unshaven. Yet his green eyes still burned with a fierce, mocking light. He rose, offering a theatrical bow. "My Lord Stark, to what do I owe the honor? Have you come to feed me to the dear wolves?" Robb's expression remained impassive. "Not today." Ned studied Jaime. He remembered well the day he had found the Kingslayer seated on the Iron Throne after killing the Mad King, his cloak stained with blood. So many years had passed, and now here Jaime was, a prisoner. It was almost surreal. "We've come to discuss your father," Ned said plainly. "We gave him terms. He refused. We're close to storming his fortifications or starving him out. Either way, blood will flow. We wish to avoid further senseless killing." Jaime's lips twisted into a wry smile. "You want me to plead with my father to bend the knee to Renly? Knowing Lord Tywin, I suspect he'd rather see us all burned than yield to that boy king." "Oh." Robb bristled. "King Renly is your rightful liege. Joffrey's parentage is a lie, and the realm knows it." Jaime shrugged. "Some might believe that, some might not. The rumors about Cersei and me, well, they have a grain of truth, I suppose." He smirked, not bothering to deny it. "But the difference between rumor and proof is vast, and father won't concede that lightly." Ned took a step closer, voice calm but steeled. "If your father continues to resist, then House Lannister may be crushed. The Westerlands could suffer horribly. You might live to see your family's downfall from inside this cage. But it does not have to end that way. Convince him to negotiate in earnest. Otherwise, we will escalate. Do not doubt that." "Nay." Jaime's eyes flicked to Ned's face. "You talk of escalation, and yet here I stand, unmaimed, unlashed. Perhaps you're kinder jailers than I expected, or perhaps you're simply reluctant to get blood on those honorable hands." A short, bitter laugh. "I've always wondered, Lord Stark, did you judge me for killing the Mad King? For that single thrust of the sword that saved tens of thousands of innocent lives, including your sisters? Or do you still see it as a betrayal of your precious vows?" Ned's face remained impassive. "Whatever I felt about your past actions, Jaime, that's not the matter at hand. We're offering you a chance to prevent thousands more deaths." Jaime studied him for a long moment. "You think I have influence over my father? Perhaps. But he's not a man who listens to counsel that smells of surrender. Besides, I'm not entirely sure he'll lift a finger to save me. I've disappointed him before." "Mine. Robb clenched a fist. "You'd do nothing then, while your house drowns in blood?" "I'd do something if there was a chance it would work," Jaime admitted. "But father is father, and you hold all the best cards now, so why not just storm his fortress and get it over with? Is that what you want me to say? Beg for mercy?" Ned let out a slow breath, realizing that Jaime was as prideful as Tywin. "We're done here," he said. "If you change your mind, speak with the guards." They turned to go. Jaime's voice followed them, dry as dust. "I'll be here if you need me." When Ned glanced back, Jaime had folded his arms, leaning against the wall, a faint glimmer of resigned amusement in his eyes. Outside, Robb exhaled sharply. "That was useless. He won't help." Ned gave a curt nod. Pride and bitterness. Jaime might fear losing his head, but he fears losing face more. Perhaps we'll glean more by starving him of courtesy for a while. They went back to Renly's command tent, where a fresh wave of arguments had erupted, whether to attempt a direct assault on Tywin's entrenchments, or starve him out, or lure him into another feint. The debate churned, with no immediate resolution. Ned favored caution, wary of a direct assault that could cost countless lives. Renly, pressed by many to demonstrate royal boldness, leaned toward an aggressive action. Robb recommended a middle path, careful feints, and a partial siege, maintaining a ring around Tywin's lines to prevent any breakout, but not rushing into a slaughter. Days passed in uneasy standoff. Skirmishes broke out occasionally. Scouts exchanged arrows with Lannister sentries. A sense of frustration simmered in the Allied camp. Soldiers grew bored, restless. They wanted either a final battle or a settlement. Some worried about winter's approach, though the year was not far advanced enough for heavy snows in the south. Amid this tension, a raven arrived from King's Landing. Sir Barristan Selmy's writing was neat but urgent. The gist of it: matters in the city were stable for the moment, though a new rumor had sparked fear. Certain merchants claimed that the Targaryen girl Daenerys Stormborn had hatched dragons in the east. Bards whispered that the mother of dragons would come home. The city's people, always prone to rumor, wondered if a new threat might appear on the horizon. Barristan's letter ended by saying that if Renly and Ned intended to hold the throne, they could not ignore the possibility of a Targaryen resurgence forever. Ned read the letter to Renly, who only scoffed. "Dragons? Do you believe it?" Ned hesitated. "I've learned not to dismiss such tales lightly. The world is wide, and there are old powers we barely understand. If the last Targaryen truly has dragons, it changes everything. But it might be no more than gossip spread by frightened sailors." "No." Renly frowned. "Perhaps, but we have enough troubles here for now. If the Targaryen girl does land, that's a foe for another day." They resumed their focus on the Lannisters. Late in the evening, Ned took a lonely walk along the perimeter of the Allied camp. Torches flickered and distant horns sounded in the night. He passed row after row of tents until he reached the outer watchposts, where men in mail stood guard. Beyond lay a vast, dark plain, rolling gently toward the foothills. By starlight he could just make out the Lannister torches in the distance, tiny pinpricks of orange. The war felt interminable, an endless dance of watchfires. He paused, gazing west. Tywin was in that direction, brooding over lost ground. The man had always been formidable, an implacable symbol of Lannister power. Yet for all his cunning, Tywin seemed at a loss now. Pride might bring him to ruin. If so, Ned wondered how many more would die before that ruin was complete. The next morning a cold wind swept through the camp. Scouts returned with news that some Lannister detachments had attempted small sorties in the night, testing the Allied lines but quickly retreating. A minor nuisance. Renly met with his advisors, frustration etched on his brow. They decided on a plan, a multi-pronged feint that might trick Tywin into launching a sortie, exposing a flank. If that happened, the Allies would pounce. Over the following week they executed the plan. Robb and Edmure Tully led a group to feign weakness along a ridge, visible to Lannister scouts. Meanwhile, Ned and Renly maintained a strong force hidden behind rolling terrain, ready to surge forward if Tywin took the bait. Each day, they rearranged their forces and performed maneuvers to suggest disorganization. On the fifth day, just before dusk, horns blared from the Lannister lines. A mass of cavalry emerged, with foot soldiers behind, pressing toward Robb's position. It seemed Tywin had finally bitten the hook. Robb's vanguard fell back, playing their part. A wave of Lannister knights thundered forward, spears glinting. Ned, hidden with Renly's large cavalry force, peered over a grassy hill, heart pounding. At his side, Renly's expression was taut with anticipation. When the Lannisters advanced far enough, a horn sounded from the Stark lines, 3 long blasts, the signal to charge. Renly gave a sharp command, and hundreds of mounted knights surged over the rise, banners streaming in the wind. It was a thunderous collision. The Lannister cavalry realized too late they had been lured into a trap. They tried to wheel about, but the allies smashed into their flanks. Swords clashed, horses screamed, and the battlefield became a maelstrom of swirling dust and blood. Ned led his contingent of Northmen on the left, driving home the advantage. He saw Robb's banner in the center, the gray direwolf emblazoned on white, forging ahead with unstoppable momentum. For a time, chaos reigned. Lannister men fought desperately, some in shining plate, others in ragged mail. The allies had them surrounded. Trumpets blared, men shouted. Through the din, Ned glimpsed the Red Lion standard, perhaps Sir Stafford Lannister leading a desperate rally. But that rally broke under the combined weight of Tyrell knights and Tully outriders swooping in from the wings. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The clash lasted nearly an hour, leaving the field littered with bodies, but eventually the Lannisters broke. Hundreds tried to flee back to their entrenchments, but the allies pursued relentlessly. The trap was succeeding beyond Ned's hopes. He reined in to catch his breath, scanning for Robb. He spotted him not far away, dismounting to help a wounded bannerman. Smoke from burning siege engines curled in the distance. The thunder of hooves pounded around them as cavalry units finished the rout. If Tywin was with this force, he'd be in grave danger. But Ned suspected the old lion was deeper in the rear, letting his subordinates risk the initial assault. By the time full night fell, the allies had seized significant ground, forcing the Lannisters to retreat to an inner ring of hastily built fortifications. The cost had been high, Scores of allied knights lay dead or wounded. But it was a decisive move that put Tywin on the back foot more than ever. Renly, gathering with Ned, Robb, and the others, surveyed the battered battlefield in the dim glow of torches. Renly's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but he exuded a fierce satisfaction. "We have them. Another push tomorrow, and we may breach their lines entirely." Robb agreed, though he eyed the casualty reports with grim eyes. "We'll let the men rest tonight, then at dawn we strike again. If we can drive them back further, Tywin may have no choice but to surrender or flee." Ned gazed over the field. The moans of the wounded drifted through the gloom. "We must remain vigilant. Tywin will not go quietly." "Naima hordicues." "Then we meet him with all we have," Renly said. Morning came with a haze of wood smoke from the smoldering remains of scorched siege engines and supply wagons. The allies mustered, forming up along the ridges and in the open plain. Tywin's men were visible in the near distance, behind a line of hastily dug trenches and sharpened stakes. The banners of the Golden Lion hung in tattered lines. The allies advanced, carefully at first, mindful of traps. Arrows whistled, crossbows fired, men in heavy armor trudged forward with shields raised. The Lannisters put up a fierce defense, but morale was clearly shaken. A sense of near despair clung to them. Then, partway through the morning assault, horns sounded from the Lannister camp. The fighting lulled. A lone messenger rode out, waving a white banner. At once, Ned, Robb, and Renly signaled their men to hold. The messenger rode up, breath ragged, and called out that Lord Tywin requested a parley. Renly, Ned, and Robb conferred swiftly. "He might be stalling," Robb warned. "Another feint, or a chance to regroup?" Renly nodded, expression cautious. "True. But if he really wishes to surrender, we cannot spurn him. We should accept." "Not any day." They agreed to meet Tywin under a flag of truce at midday, on neutral ground between the lines. The allies set up a broad space, ringed by knights with arms at rest. In the distance, the battered Lannister forces maintained a wary formation, also holding back from hostilities. A single tent was erected in the center of the field. Ned, Renly, and Robb entered, accompanied by a small retinue, including the Greatjon, Roose Bolton, and a handful of Tyrell knights. Tywin arrived with Kevan Lannister, Sir Edam Marbrand, and a few other loyal captains. The tension was thick as a blade's edge. Tywin Lannister looked every inch the imposing lord he had always been. Tall, spare, with a shaved head of golden stubble. But Ned saw lines of strain in his face, the marks of sleepless nights. Their armies had hammered him relentlessly. Jaime was a prisoner, as were Cersei and Joffrey. His legacy teetered on the brink, yet his eyes were still as cold and proud as ever. Renly broke the silence first. "My Lord Tywin, you asked for a parley." Tywin's mouth thinned. "It seems this war has not gone in my family's favor, but do not think that means we will kneel easily. If you wish to avoid the slaughter of more men, we might find an arrangement." Robb snorted softly, but Ned touched his arm in caution. "We are listening, my lord," Ned said. "What are your terms, and what do you propose to accept in return?" Tywin's gaze flicked between them, settling on Ned. "You hold my son Jaime, my daughter Cersei, and her child. You control King's Landing, the capital, and you claim that whelp," he jerked his chin at Renly, "is the rightful king. I say the throne belongs to House Baratheon if they can hold it, but only with the help of House Lannister. We propose a marriage alliance to cement the peace, the release of my family, and a declaration that House Lannister retains dominion over the Westerlands and all attendant rights. In exchange, we will acknowledge Renly Baratheon as king." Well. A hush fell in the tent. Renly, with Margaery's presence in mind, tensed at the mention of a marriage alliance. "I already have a queen," he replied coolly. "I have no need for a Lannister bride." Tywin's lip curled. "You speak of Margaery Tyrell. That is a recent arrangement, is it not? Perhaps there are other ways to bind our houses, but if not through marriage, then gold or wards might be the solution." "Nakatiyasal." The Greatjon made a rude noise. "Our victory is nearly complete. Why should we settle for half measures? We can starve you out and force unconditional surrender." Kevan Lannister stepped forward, tone surprisingly calm, "and lose thousands more men in the process. My lord nephew, Jaime, might pay with his life if you push this war to the brink. The same for the boy, Joffrey. Do you truly wish that blood on your hands? House Lannister will not go quietly if forced to humiliating terms. Nail. Ned sighed inwardly. Tywin was indeed cornered, but the old lion's pride remained intact. We offered you quite merciful terms before, Ned said. You refused. Now your position is weaker. What we demand is simple. You acknowledge Renly as the rightful king and accept that Cersei's children have no claim to the throne. You can keep your lands, your gold, your seat at Casterly Rock. But we will not release all your hostages without firm guarantees. Jaime's freedom may come in time, but Joffrey remains in custody until we see your loyalty proven. Nah. No. Tywin stiffened. And if I refuse again? Renly answered, eyes flinty. If you refuse, we crush you, slowly if we must. House Lannister will be reduced to ashes. I know you're ruthless, my lord, but so are we when pressed. There is no room left for half measures. The tent crackled with tension. Finally, Tywin let out a long breath through his nose. Very well. You propose that I acknowledge your kingship, that we disclaim Joffrey's rights, and that in exchange we keep our seat. We pay no outrageous ransom aside from symbolic tributes, I presume. No. Renly nodded slowly. A modest sum for reparations in the Riverlands and other regions you have ravaged, and you must deliver hostages of your own as surety, perhaps your grandson, Tommen, or another suitable family member, until we are certain you will not rise against us. Tywin's hands curled at his sides. You, try my patience. Ned saw the tremor of anger in the old man's posture. If there's no trust, there can be no peace. Hostages are a necessity in these times. Then, Tywin's mind seemed to race, weighing all possible outcomes. Finally, his shoulders slumped, just a fraction. We must consult further on details, but the principle is workable. That single word signaled the beginning of the end. The two sides hammered out the broad strokes of a treaty. House Lannister would bend the knee to Renly Baratheon, disclaiming any claim for Joffrey or Tommen. They would retain their lands and titles in the Westerlands, paying a manageable sum to repair the damage in the Riverlands. Jaime's eventual release might be negotiated once the treaty was firmly observed. Tywin insisted that Joffrey be treated honorably. Renly and Ned agreed that the boy would remain a hostage but be raised in comfortable quarters, perhaps in Storm's End, far from the capital. Tywin also promised to give his younger grandson Tommen as a ward in King's Landing, to ensure continued loyalty. The hatred between the factions remained simmering, but it was overshadowed by the exhaustion of war. By nightfall, the Allied forces and Lannisters had ceased open hostilities, though all remained watchful. Messengers rushed back and forth, finalizing details. The Greatjon cursed at the idea of sparing Tywin, but Ned reminded him that an endless war would benefit no one. He too felt a twinge of unease at allowing the Lannisters to remain powerful. Yet better that than continued bloodshed. In the morning, Tywin rode out from his lines under the Golden Lion banner, accompanied by a retinue of battered knights. Renly, Ned, and Robb met him openly. There, in a grim and ceremonial display, Tywin bent a knee to King Renly Baratheon and spoke words of fealty, his voice as cold and stiff as a winter wind. As he rose, there was no mistaking the fury in his eyes, but the oath had been spoken in front of thousands of witnesses, on the ashes of the battlefield. One of the greatest lords in Westeros had yielded to a younger brother's claim. Afterward, the men parted with no pleasantries. Tywin withdrew to gather his battered army and begin returning to the Westerlands, leaving behind a cadre of hostages. The allies dispersed carefully, ensuring no treachery would occur in the immediate aftermath. Scouts confirmed that the Lannisters, though sullen, truly were withdrawing. Some days later, Jaime Lannister was transferred to King's Landing under heavy guard to remain a hostage for the time being, but with an agreement that he would be kept in honorable captivity rather than a dungeon cell. Tyrion, still traveling with the allies in an odd half-prisoner, half-advisor capacity, watched the departure with a strange expression. He and Jaime exchanged a single look, but no words, as Jaime was led away. Renly ordered a partial disbanding of the allied host. Stormland lords were sent back to their lands, Tully bannermen to theirs, each carrying letters that confirmed the new peace. The Tyrell forces, accompanied by Margaery, remained with Renly as an honor guard. Robb Stark and Ned conferred about whether the North should also demobilize. With Tywin subdued, the realm was momentarily at peace, yet there was still talk of the Ironborn, the rumored Targaryens, and other threats. For now they decided that Robb would lead the Northern Bannermen back toward Winterfell, to set the region in order and prepare for any new menace that might arise. Ned intended to return to King's Landing with Renly, wanting to keep an eye on the center of power. He felt uneasy about leaving Robb to rule the North alone, but the boy had grown far beyond his years in a short span. Catelyn would go with Robb, to help him govern as Lady of Winterfell. The farewells were bittersweet. Father and son clasped hands, and Catelyn embraced Ned. "Take care in that viper's nest," she whispered. "Cersei may be a captive, but there are always serpents about." Ned nodded. "I'll keep my wits about me. And you, stay safe on the journey north. The roads may still have brigands." With that, the northern forces departed, horns blowing a somber farewell. The Tully men likewise turned east, heading for Riverrun. The great alliance that had formed was now partly dissolving, each region returning to its rightful place with a new monarchy at the helm. In the end, only a strong force of Tyrell knights, some Stormlanders, and Ned Stark's personal guard traveled south with King Renly. They reached King's Landing weeks later, the roads busy with caravans of merchants who had learned that peace, however uneasy, had returned. The city's gates opened to them. Ned felt a pang of familiarity at the sight of the walls and towers, remembering how different the city had seemed when he first arrived as Robert's hand. The difference now was that the banners on display featured Renly's crowned stag. The populace lined the streets, uncertain whether to cheer or remain silent. Some called out blessings for King Renly. Others stared sullenly. But the overall mood was calmer than Ned had feared. They rode up to the Red Keep. Ser Barristan Selmy met them in the courtyard, bowing to Renly with a grave expression. Behind him stood a few gold cloaks, plus Sansa and Arya, both of whom beamed when they saw their father. Sansa was the first to run forward. Arya was second, though she tried to appear stoic. Ned dismounted and hugged them both. "My girls," he said, breath shaky with relief. "You're safe." Arya grinned up at him. "Safe enough but bored. I've had no real fights in weeks." Sansa gave her sister an exasperated look, then turned to Ned with tears in her eyes. "Father, it's good to have you back." Ned smiled gently. "I'm here, my sweet girl." Renly looked on, a small, fond smile on his lips, then turned to greet Barristan. "Ser Barristan, how stands the realm?" The old knight bowed. "No new troubles, your grace. Word of your treaty with Lord Tywin has begun to spread. The small folk are hopeful for an end to strife. We have kept the queen and her son in comfortable quarters, under watch. They've caused no trouble, though the queen remains resentful." Ned. Renly's features tightened. "I'm sure she does, but let us not dwell on that today. We'll see her soon enough." That evening, the Red Keep was alive with preparations for a formal ceremony to mark Renly's triumphant return. Nobles who had stayed in King's Landing arrived, wearing their finery, eager to curry favor. Marguerite Tyrell made a gracious appearance, dazzling in a gown of shimmering green. Grand Maester Pycelle tottered forth, smiling obsequiously, trying to assure Renly of his loyal service. Varys emerged from the shadows to bow deeply, whispering honeyed words about how the realm needed stability. Ned noted that Littlefinger remained absent, locked away for the time being. He had been imprisoned early in Renly's coup, but rumors hinted that the new king might soon release him, under watch of course, believing Baelish's cunning might be useful, if properly leashed. Despite the swirling courtly festivities, Ned found time to slip away with his daughters to a small courtyard, overshadowed by a twisted myrish oak. There, the three of them talked quietly about all that had transpired. Arya excitedly recounted her practice sessions, how she'd bested a Stormlands squire in a friendly spar. Sansa was more subdued, speaking only of how she'd tried to keep her composure despite the uncertain times. Ned listened, heart aching with both pride and sorrow. So much had changed. "I promise," he said softly to them, "that once the dust settles, I'll send you both home, if that's what you wish. Or you may stay here, if you prefer, and if we can ensure your safety, we'll decide together." Arya huffed. "I want to see Winterfell again, but I'm not ready to give up my sword lessons." Ned smiled. Perhaps you'll find a master-at-arms in Winterfell who can keep training you. Sansa exhaled a shaky breath. I don't want to be a prisoner to any queen or king's whim, father. I'd rather be in the north, too, if it's safe. Ned squeezed her hand. We'll make it safe. That is my oath. Nanve. When they parted, Arya dashed off to find the knight who had promised her another lesson, while Sansa retreated to her chambers. Ned lingered in the courtyard, feeling relief that they were at least alive and well. The war had spared them, and that was worth every compromise he had made. In the following weeks, King Renly held a grand coronation ceremony, this time more official than his rushed pronouncement upon Robert's death. The High Septon officiated in the Great Sept of Baelor, with many nobles in attendance. The Tyrells, wearing resplendent green, stood at the forefront. Renly and Margaery processed down the aisle to the sound of trumpets. Ned, solemn in black, escorted them part of the way. Sir Barristan stood as Kingsguard, white cloak draped over his shoulders. Outside, cheering crowds lined the city's winding streets, for the golden bread distributed by the Tyrells and the new king's men had won them some measure of goodwill. In a display carefully orchestrated for political effect, the Lannister envoys, led by Kevan Lannister, also attended, signifying that House Lannister had acknowledged Renly's rule. This was a moment that would have been unthinkable a few short months earlier. Yet, here they were. The realm, battered but united beneath a new Baratheon king, watched as Renly ascended the marble steps and received the crown from the High Septon. Margaery, radiant as the sun, stood by his side. The watchers cried out, "Long live King Renly!" Ned, in the front row, felt a pang of memory. He recalled Robert's coronation long ago, the fervor, the sense that a new age was dawning. This time, the realm was in a different place, still reeling from conflict, uncertain of the future. Yet hope glimmered in the gilded air of the Sept. If Renly could rule with more wisdom than Robert had, if he could hold the alliance of the major houses without letting old grudges fester, perhaps Westeros would know peace. But Ned knew how precarious that hope was. Tywin Lannister's resentment, the potential ambitions of Balon Greyjoy, the possibility of a Targaryen resurgence, any of these could ignite a fresh blaze. Once the coronation ended, Renly and Margaery rode in a gilded carriage back to the Red Keep, followed by throngs of celebrants. Feasts were held in the castle halls. Jugglers and musicians performed. Wine flowed. People danced. Beneath the swirl of festivities, there were hushed corners where quiet conspiracies might be born, but for at least one night, King's Landing reveled in a show of unity. Ned attended the feast but did not linger. He congratulated Renly and Margaery, then spoke quietly with Sir Barristan about security matters, ensuring Joffrey and Cersei were still under guard in a separate tower. The boy was rumored to have become sullen, prone to fits of rage. Cersei was even more bitter, rarely speaking except to hurl insults. So long as they posed no threat, Renly chose not to punish them further. Some urged him to send them to the Silent Sisters or some remote holdfast, but for now, he kept them near, a reminder of House Lannister's old ambition. As the evening wore on, Ned slipped out to the castle ramparts, where the city sprawled below in torchlit revelry. Stars blinked overhead. Footsteps behind him alerted him to someone's presence. He turned to see Renly approaching, cloak swishing. A guard trailed at a distance but did not intrude. Ned inclined his head. "Your Grace, congratulations on your coronation." Renly shook his head with a slight grin. "I prefer it when you call me Renly, if only in private. I've had enough pomp for one lifetime." He leaned on the parapet, staring out at the city lights. "I wanted to thank you, Ned. Without your counsel, I might have rushed headlong into a bloodbath, or ended up in a shallow grave. Instead, we have peace, however tenuous. Now in our lives." Ned's voice was quiet. "I only did what I believed was right for the realm. If we'd let the Lannisters gain control, or if we had waged an endless war for the throne, too many innocents would have died." Renly nodded, expression sober. "I know, and now that I wear the crown, I see how heavy it is," Robert complained often, "but I never understood fully until now. Every decision might shape the fate of thousands." Ned studied him for a moment. "You can be a good king. You have a gift for winning hearts. Just remember that good kings listen to wise counsel, even when it contradicts their impulses." Renly gave a half smile. You'll remain in King's Landing, as my hand in all but name, I hope. I can hardly think of a better man for the role." Ned paused, his heart catching. The idea of once again occupying that seat after all the blood spilled weighed on him. But what alternative was there? "If that is what you wish, Your Grace." Renly's eyes gleamed. "I do. I suspect the realm will need both of us in the days to come." "Nedby." They gazed out over the city together. The faint sounds of music drifted on the night air. Somewhere in the slums, small folk might be celebrating or cursing the new king. In the Red Keep, the lords and ladies danced and drank. War's embers still glowed across the land, but for this fleeting moment Westeros was not drowning in blood. A messenger arrived then, bowing low. "Your Grace, Lord Stark. Apologies, but there is a ship in the harbor carrying an envoy from the Iron Islands. He requests an audience." "Whoa." Renly's face darkened slightly. "The Iron Islands?" Balon Greyjoy wastes no time. He shot Ned a meaningful look. "So it begins again. We cannot escape the Game of Thrones." Ned felt his shoulders tense. "We'll meet them." Together they turned away from the parapet, stepping down into the torchlit corridor. The realm might have found a moment of uneasy peace, but the tides of ambition and old grudges still churned just beyond the horizon. Yet Ned Stark felt a small glimmer of resolve in his heart. He would stand in the breach. He would serve the realm, to keep war at bay if he could, for the sake of his family and for all those who could not defend themselves. In that resolve, he found a measure of clarity, and for now, that was enough. So it was that, on the eve of King Renly Baratheon's grand coronation, peace arrived in Westeros like a hesitant dawn, uncertain whether to stay or fade back into the darkness. The new king and his loyal allies had carved out a reprieve from the bloodshed, forging an alliance that toppled the Lannister hold on the throne, subdued Stannis' claim, and laid to rest the immediate threat of civil war. But seeds of discord still lurked in every corner of the realm. The Ironborn stirred, the Targaryen rumor glowed in the east, and in the distant north, beyond even Winterfell, an ancient chill waited for no man's politics. The future of the Seven Kingdoms balanced on a knife's edge, caught between fragile peace and the next spark of conflict. Yet for one brief moment, Ned Stark allowed himself to believe that, just maybe, honor and unity would prevail. Only time, and the shifting winds of fate would decide.